Hello guys, and welcome to part 4 of the Microsoft Flight Simulator development series. So in episode 4 we covered landing gears. However, I ended up doing that wrong, and I completely apologize to the entire community for that. So we are going to be redoing landing gears right now at the beginning of this episode 5, so we can get that out of the way. So I think a lot of the reason why I didn't do it right the last episode was due to the fact that this is not a landing gear plane, so I was just kind of making it up as I went, and was getting way off topic and doing things wrong without even thinking about the process. So let's go ahead and jump into that again. So what I've done here, which is not shown in episode 4 anymore because I went back and re-edited that video, but I have my left wheel, which I've separated from the aircraft, the right wheel, and then the front wheel, okay? And I've just separated these so that we can have some kind of landing gear animation. Like I said, this obviously isn't a plane built to have some kind of landing gear animation, but we're just kind of making it up as we go. But this time I have the proper process for y'all. So let's go ahead and start on the left wheel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into animation. And in animation, let me explain the process of the landing gear wheels. So we're going to be using the Asobo template instead of custom animation. So with the template, we need to do 0 to 100 for the wheel animation, and then 100 to 200 for the compression animation, or the animation when the aircraft is touching down on the ground and you get a little bit of compression on the ground so that the landing gear moves up or down a little bit, if you know what I'm saying there. So let's go ahead and jump into the landing gear. So we're going to go ahead and have the fully extended as our base. So we want at 100 frames, we want it to be fully extended. And then let's go ahead and go to 0, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to rotate this probably about 110 degrees and set that as the other key. So what's going to happen is it's just going to kind of unfold out. That will be our animation for this side, okay? And just to show you that these animations work on different keyframe lengths, let's go ahead and go to 100 on the right wheel. Set that keyframe, and then we'll go to 100 again, and let's rotate this to a negative 110. But let's copy it up to 20. We're going to copy this keyframe and post it here so you can kind of see that there's delay between two. And so you can animate these to look good in any sense, whether this was a door or another wheel or some separate piece, some separate part. You can always animate them differently, but still have them activated by the same landing gear animation code. So before we start going into the names of all those, let's go ahead and jump into the nose wheel. So I think for this one, we'll just go to 100 frames here, add our keyframes, and then for this one, we'll probably just keep it simple and just have it go in and out of the aircraft. And then maybe have this one take a break here all the way to 40 so that you can kind of see the multiple levels of the landing gear here. But basically everything is fully extended at 100 and then fully in at 0. Okay, so we got kind of 3 different animations here to let you guys kind of see how these all work with the same keying set. And then let's go into keyframes 101 to 200, and these are your compression, okay? So we'll start at 100, and then for the compression on this, I would assume when it touches the ground, it's not going to go in too much. Obviously, if you have some kind of struts or something on the aircraft, this will make it look a lot better. But this is just kind of your compression on touchdown. So you don't want to be doing too crazy of movements unless you have some kind of compression that does that. And same for this one. I don't know what we're going to be doing on these side wheels here because obviously these don't really have compression. Maybe we'll have these just kind of rotate out a little bit so that it kind of bends as it comes out. As it touches the ground, it kind of bows out a little bit. So we'll do that for that one, and then we'll come to this side and do the same thing. Just kind of bow it out a little bit. And so as we can see from keyframe 0, everything's unfolding and extended. Keyframe 100, it's fully extended, and then we have just a little bit more where there's some compression where it hits the ground and things start to bend as it touches the ground. And you can kind of see that as I exaggerate the speed here. When it hits the ground, it will kind of do that movement. Okay, so now that we got that, let's drop all three of these, the front wheel to an NLA track, the left wheel and the right wheel to an NLA track. And I believe I showed you guys this in the other episode, what we're going to be using as far as what XML scripting. So if I go to the dev series, old reliable, all the way in to the XML, you can see here that we put the custom animation for the props from the last episode, and then we cleaned up this entire section. What we did leave was the component ID gears for the gear center, okay? And I believe I still showed this in the last episode, even though we didn't drop into gears anymore because I messed up. But we still have this section. I was going to show you guys why I kept it at gear center instead of doing it the long version, which was I'm going to go ahead and just open that so I can show you again. And why we decided to get rid of the left and the right and the center tire and the left tire and the right tire and the steering. And we could actually go back and add the steering so that we just have a front wheel steering going on as well if we want to animate that. But I'm showing you guys basically how to do this all with your center wheel. And you can delve a little deeper into this on your own time and let me know what you guys prefer. But as far as for beginner guide, I find it way easy just to drop everything into a gear center template so that when your gear comes down, it just reads everything as the gear center, and it all comes down at the same time. So let's go ahead and rename these all to gear center for the animation name there. And then let's go ahead and save and export this file. Okay, and then I'm going to open up Flight Simulator and see you guys in a second here. Okay, so welcome back. So what we're going to be doing here is just reopening that old reliable project for the first time today. And we just exported that new file with the landing gears into our project sources folder. So we're going to go ahead and rebuild that package. Okay, so the package is rebuilt. Let's go ahead and get into the game with it. So we have our 24 aircraft. Let's find the old reliable. And then let's select a runway to get to. And we'll see you guys in the game in 1 second. Okay, so we are now in the game, and as you can see here, what I've done prior to this episode is I've removed all that crap graphics here that was on the dashboard, because today we're going to be delving a little bit more into the dashboard, which is going to be nice, or your cockpit, 3D gauges, screens, a little bit of that stuff. But before we go there, a little bit more into detail there, let's go ahead and check out the landing gear here. So as you can see, I probably need to mess with the contact points a little bit to get them touching the ground a little bit better, but we now have our landing gear extended on the ground. So if we go to take off, And let's get her in the air so we can show you the landing gear animation here. Okay. And if I do the landing gear animation, oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. There we go. Sorry about that. You guys can see the landing gear coming in and out now. And let me get a little closer look there. So as you can see, they all got their own animation. Remember how we made that one open before that one? So you can see everything's working the way it should. Now if we go to the ground, let's try to get a good view here as I go towards the ground. Sorry, I'm all over the place as always, flying these things. I want to show you guys as it touches the ground here that we have a little bit of compression. Then let's see, as you can kind of see already, what it's going to look like as it bounces. So you got your compression as it touches down on the ground, and I hope you guys can see that fairly well. Let's try a different view. So you can kind of see how as it touches down on the ground, there's a little bit of weight from the aircraft, so it's doing a little bit of its animation. And that's why we need to mess with our contact points a little bit more after this, is because when it's on the ground, the contact points are just a little bit different. So let's go ahead and brake before we go into the water here. Get some drifting action. Nice stop there. And let's go into the next part of the tutorial, which we are going to talk about animating the yoke. As before, this was just a single model, as you could tell here, and I had to basically select the individual yoke and then turn it into its own object. So if you haven't done so and you plan on using this model, you're going to have to do that, which is a slight inconvenience. And then you're going to have to set the origin appropriately. In this case, the origin's not perfect, but it's pretty damn near center. It does have some rotation issues, but we'll go ahead and further use it from here and maybe clean this up down the line. Once again, this is just a little tutorial for you guys, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm just getting the basics out here so you guys know what you're doing. So the first thing we're going to need to do is once you've separated that yoke, go ahead and call it handling underscore yoke. And then what we're going to have to do is we're going to be animating empties. So what you need to do is you need to click on that yoke. You need to do Control S, cursor to selected, which drops your cursor on top of that origin. Then once you have the cursor on the origin, go ahead and create an empty, a plain axis, and then go ahead and create another empty on the plain axis. Now we have two empties with their origins on exactly where our cursor origin was. So what we need to do is on empty 1, we need to go ahead and rename empty 1 that we created to call it handling underscore yoke forward back helper. And then on the second one, we need to call it handling underscore yoke left right helper. Okay, so now we have our handling yoke, our handling forward back helper, and our handling left right helper. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking that yoke and putting it inside the forward back, and then putting the forward back inside the left to right. So all we got to do is we got to select the yoke, hold Control on the keyboard, select the forward and back, go to your main viewer, hold Control P, set parent to object, but keep transform. So now inside the yoke forward back, we have our handling yoke. Now we're just going to click on the yoke forward back, then click on the yoke left right, do Control P again, keep transform. So now we have our handling yoke left right helper. Inside that we have our handling yoke forward back helper. Inside of that we have our handling yoke. Okay, so we're creating this hierarchy tree with these empties, which we're going to be using for each individual part to animate. Next, we're going to want to create our animations or our NLA tracks. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and select the yoke left-right helper, and this is selecting that empty, and we're going to animate the empty, which is in return is going to animate the handling yoke. So let's go ahead, and these templates are all from 0 to 100, so we can go ahead and go to keyframe 50. Let me zoom in here so it's a little easier to see. Keyframe 50, make sure we have either, we could just do rotation for this one, but I'm going to keep on location and rotation. We can set our keyframe, go to keyframe 0, and let's go to left. As you can see, my origin's not perfect. We can rotate this 90 degrees, and then add that keyframe, and then go to keyframe 100, and change that rotation to -90. And now, as you can see, we have a rotation. My origin's not perfect, so you can kind of see the back bar here sliding around the background, but it will work. And something else I want to show you guys that a lot of you guys were having issues with your animations. As you can see, it slows down and it's not linear. So if you actually select all your keyframes, right-click, interpolation mode, and you change that to linear, you'll have this nice green line going through all your keyframes, and that will keep everything at a constant linear speed from all your keyframe points, so you won't have it get to like this point and slowly start slowing down. This is really helpful when you start getting to 3D animations and gauges, which have certain keyframes that you got to be putting the needle at for your gauge, and it won't be slowing down before it hits that gauge, and it won't be screwing up your animation. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, we just finished our yoke left-right helper. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to drop that to an NLA track. And you're going to want to call this NLA track specifically. Go ahead and double-click that and call it handling, or all caps. I don't know if it matters, but I don't take chances. So all caps handling, yoke, lever, stick, left, right. Okay, and then you're going to want to go over here, drop that NLA track you just labeled, and you're going to want to click on, if we make this bigger here so you can see, this handling yoke right helper action. Double click on that, and you're going to want to rename the actual animation itself to handling yoke, lever, stick, left, right, handling yoke, left, right, left, helper. Okay, so it's a lot of names in here, but this is what the template's using. And I don't know if all these names are mandatory. I haven't tried, but what I have done is I've done this once and it gets good results, so I've kept this process the same. If it's not, and you guys find out that you don't need to be renaming all these certain ways to make it work with the template, then go ahead and share that in the comments below, and help all of each other out. So now we got left right done. Let's go ahead and leave that as is, and let's go ahead and minus that, and we'll go to the forward and back. So now that we have this dropped to an NLA track, what we can do is we can hit this mute button. And what this mute button does, or this little check mark, is it won't display that animation. Okay, so if we unmute it, as you can see, it's animating. Let's go ahead and mute that so that we don't see that, so we can clearly see what we're doing with our forward and back. So let's go ahead and click our forward and back empty. Same thing, we'll go to keyframe 50. Go ahead and add that keyframe. We'll go to keyframe 0, and 0 is all the way in. Okay, so we're going to push that in a little bit and go ahead and add that keyframe. And then keyframe 100, we're going to have it come out just a wee bit. Add that keyframe. And once again, we just now have our forward and back, and as you can see, it's slowing down. We're going to want to go ahead and add that interpolation linear mode in there, so it's all at a constant speed. And now if I actually unmute that, you can see that it's turning and going in and out. Okay, so we basically have two empties assigned to one mesh. One empty is going forward and back, and the other empty is going left to right. Now, just like before, we need to do our names on this thing, so let's go ahead and rename these. So we're going to drop this to an NLA track. We're going to call this handling yoke lever, stick, fore, aft. Okay, handling stick, lever, fore, aft. And then you're going to want to go down to that animation, click on the actual animation name itself, and we're going to type in handling yoke, lever, stick, fore, aft, handling yoke, yoke, FB, helper. Okay. And I believe for some odd reason it's saying I already have one of these. I might have, let's do helpers, and then rename that down to helper. There we go. Okay, that was strange. But there we go. So now we have all of our names in the right set that it needs to be named. So we'll go ahead and save that. Export that. Now we need to set up our XML, okay? So let's go back to our DA62 XML. And as you can see here, we're just using the Atobo exterior template, and that's for the exterior surfaces. Obviously, this is going to be an interior line, okay? So what we need to do is if we go ahead and open up, I've already got one that works great for us, and this is on the glider. But we're using our component handling Yokes template. Now, if you don't know where this is, it's because we decided to use one XML, if you guys remember that back in the day. So if I actually go back to the dev series, all the way into the old reliable, into the model, we have that interior XML that we've been ignoring this whole time. We haven't been touching it because, as you remember in the model CFG, we're ignoring the interior and we're only using the normal, which is using the exterior for both. So we can, at this point, we can separate it between our interior and our exterior. If you do that now, you're going to have to start writing that GLTF twice and exporting it and having two different Blender saves, one for your interior, one for your exterior. In this case, for the tutorial, and since this is a small aircraft, I want to continue just using the exterior for everything. But if we go ahead and click on that interior, you can see that we have all these interior scripts, specifically the handling for the yoke, which is right here, handling yokes. So we can actually copy this whole yoke component, including the trims and everything, and paste that into the our exterior one. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to copy, go to our exterior at the very bottom. Before behaviors, remember, because this is going to be a separate behavior set, and go ahead and paste that in here. So now we got our handling yokes in here, which is a new component, and this will include the left to right helper. Also, it will include some trim. We don't really need the trim, which is why I was telling you to use this one right here, because I was taking trim off. But let's go ahead and close out of that. We're going to do this from scratch. So let's get rid of some of this trim stuff. We don't really need it now. You can go ahead and leave this kind of stuff if you're going to be working on trim. Okay, so you can actually get rid of this camera title too. It's not going to matter. And there we go. We don't need two closing components for this. Or you actually... Closing, you don't need that one. Okay, so now we have our yoke template here. And as you can tell, it looks a little bit different because it's using a bunch of local variables. This is why I personally would rather use this one, and I'm going to include this one in a template for you guys so that you can go ahead and use this. It's a little bit easier to understand, but I'll strip this so you guys have it to use. And it's a little bit more, I just like it better because it explains the left to right. It also has rudder pedals, which goes into the rudder pedal animations as for the nodes, as well as the brakes, which in this case we're not going to do rudder pedals for this tutorial, But if you want to add those to the same usage, it's really easy to copy this. So let's go ahead and just do that actually and replace these. I don't really like the way this one's laying up. Okay, and it would work with either way, which I can probably show you guys here in a second. But now we need to make sure we have, since this is a handling yokes, it's not included in the exterior XML. It's actually included in a different one. So if we go back to the DA62 interior, look up here, what are they including? They are including a common behavior and a glass cockpit AS1000. So we're not going to be using the AS1000, obviously that's for a gauge, but we need to include the SOHO common XML. So we're going to go ahead and copy that and paste that right after our exterior. And now that's telling the XML file that we need to include both the exterior and the common. And then under exterior, we have all of our exterior. And then we have our handling yokes, which is a new component, which is going to be using the common. And we can do it this way, which is a real easy way. You just throw all your behaviors at the beginning, and then throw all your component templates, which are using those behaviors, somewhere in between the behavior close and the behavior open line. Okay, so that's all we are doing for that. And so let's go ahead and hit save there. Go in game, since we already, I believe, did we export that? I don't remember if we did. Go ahead and export that. And then let's go ahead and game and reopen that project. Or not reopen, sorry, rebuild that project here. Okay, so now you can see here we have our yoke, and if I turn it left, it turns left, it turns right. If I pull back and forward, and so now we have an animated yoke. And you can use this for sticks. You can go left to right with the stick, forward and back with the stick. Yeah, so the easiest way to explain this is that we just animated 2 empties, and inside those empties we have that mesh, and yeah, we just named it for the template to use, and just remember these names. And yeah, but we're going to move on to the next section, which I'm pretty excited for. And this one is going to be HTML screens, okay? And I'm going to dive a little deeper into custom HTML later. For now, I'm just going to cover the simple basis of getting a screen working. And then once we go from there, we're going to go to the last section of today, which is going to be 3D gauge animation. Okay, so there's 2 ways you can do gauges. You can do an HTML gauge, or you can do a 3D gauge animation, which I believe is easier to do, because HTML gauges get a little complicated, and then also in VR, HTML gauges do not look that good. So whenever I do a manual static gauge, let's say like airspeed or altitude, I like to make them 3D gauges because they look way better in VR and they just look better in general. But if you like to have ones that have retroactive changing, you know, between like kilometers per hour and knots that change with a click of a button, or a GPS screen, or a radio set, or things that require obviously some programming and clickables, you're going to be using HTML. So like I said, in the next episode I hope to delve deeper into custom HTML, but for this one let's go ahead and show you the basics of it and how it works. So let me go ahead and pause that so this sound's not blaring in my ear, and then let's go back into where we were. So let's create an HTML screen first, okay? And so what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to go to add, mesh, and you can do a cube, you could do a cylinder. So let's say you're doing a circular gauge that's HTML, like an HTML airspeed gauge or something like that. You can create a cylinder so it's circle. In this case, we're just going to create a GPS screen for this tutorial. So let's go cube. So now we got a cube here. Let's go ahead and resize this thing so it's a little bit more like a cube, or I mean a screen. Okay. And let's change the overall size of this so it's not massive. And then let's change the positions to 0. And there we have it. We have a little screen here, okay? Which we're going to be using as GPS, hopefully. So let's go ahead, and before we go anywhere, while we have it in a straight up and down, and it's not like tilted here, which we're going to be doing in a second to place it on top of this dashboard, while we have it straight up and down, let's go to the Y view so that we have it just straight backwards, okay? And what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to go to edit mode, select all. Sorry, we want to be in UV editing first. UV editing, and then select all, and then UV project from view. And now we have that screen projected to the view here, okay? So what we're going to want to do next is select that. We're going to want to fill this entire UV map. And then what you can do too is you can click on each individual one, and you're going to want to fill it up here. And the best way to do that is probably just to move it up and down. There we go. Okay, and obviously you can fine tune that, make it a little more perfect. But the base of it is you're just taking that front of the screen and you're filling this entire UV. That way your texture knows exactly where to place this screen on the map. Okay, so once again we got our screen, and let's go back into our animation tab and let's move this to where it needs to be. So if we go back into object mode, let's go ahead and move this into the aircraft so we can kind of see what we're doing here. And let's start tilting this. And I think that looks pretty dang good for a screen, okay? So now we got our screen in our aircraft. And what we need to do now is we need to assign a material to this screen. And once again, this is going to be using an HTML screen. So we need to make this HTML compatible. And if you haven't already looked into your panel stuff here, let's go to the dev series, old reliable, package sources into the panel. Our panel is made out of virtual cockpits, okay? And let's get rid of this line here because this is what I did earlier, so I could tell you how it works. I'll just put something there. And these virtual cockpits are telling you exactly, let's go into a different example because this one's driving me insane. Let's go into the actual, sorry, I did this earlier to make sure I knew what I was doing for you guys, and now it kind of screwed up what it was looking like. So this is what I'm saying. We have virtual cockpits. We have multiple virtual cockpits, and each virtual cockpit has an HTML gauge, okay? And these gauges are referenced because obviously these are official Asobo gauges, so we can use any of the official Asobo gauges in our own projects to start using. And once again, we have virtual cockpits and we have virtual paintings, okay? And we'll delve deeper into some of these painting stuff later on. But for now, let's move on into the virtual cockpits, which is the HTML gauges. So now that you get that, we'll go back here and let me erase that for now because we're going to be setting this up. So in our virtual cockpit, we need a size, a pixel size, a texture, and then a background color, which I need to copy over, and then a HTML gauge. Okay, gauge 00 is what they use commonly. And what you're going to be doing here is you're going to be figuring out what gauge exactly you want to be throwing here. And like I said, we'll go into custom HTML in the next episode. For this one, we're just going to go into gauge copying off a Sobo aircraft. So let's go ahead and let's do one that I like to use for all these small aircraft. Go to our community folder, go back one to the official one store, and let's go ahead and check on the aircraft, the icon. Okay, now if we go into the icon, go into its panel CFG, you can see that it is using that nav system or the GPS system, the ERA system. Okay, and so what we can do is we can actually copy the HTML gauge, the texture, the pixel size, and the size. Okay, we'll go ahead and copy that, go into ours, and just paste that in Virtual Cockpit 1. And now we have the ERA, okay, with the texture name hash or $ touchpad. So let's go ahead and save that while we're here in the old reliable. Go back to in here, click on the screen that we made. Go ahead, we can rename this to something like GPS screen, just so we know. And then on the GPS screen, we need to create a new material. Okay, and this material is extremely important because how you name this material is exactly how it's going to react with your panel CFG. So we actually need to name this one $, I believe it was touchpad, right? Let me make sure. Yep, $ touchpad. Okay, so we have our material named in Blender as $ touchpad. Now we have to assign under this principal BSDF material properties, we have to give it certain material properties so that the screen works in the game. The first one we need to change is the metallics. We need to change the metallics all the way up to 1.0. Okay. The second one we need to change is roughness. It's default to 0.5. We need to change that up to 1.0 as well. And then up on the base color, you need to click that and make sure it is fully white. And then on the subsurface color, you need to make sure that is fully white as well. So we have 2 fully whites, metallic at 1.0, roughness at 1.0. And then on the emission, you need to click the emission and you need to make sure that is fully white as well. So we have 3 fully whites, a metallic 1.0, a roughness 1.0, and then make sure your alpha is 1.0. Now we are not adding any specific Microsoft Flight Simulator parameters, so we don't have to do anything that. We're just using our basic principal BSDF node. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and hit save there. And we have our ERA system in the game. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this works, and if it doesn't work right off the bat, I can tell you exactly where we need to make a change, and I'll probably show you that anyways even if it doesn't work. So let's go ahead, and I keep forgetting if I export that. I'm sorry guys, head's a little cloudy today. Hit export, go back in the game, and then let's rebuild this package here. Okay, so as you can see there, we had a little bit of flash, and we have our HTML screen in the game. So we can actually click on this, it's fully clickable. And you have now copied the icon, HTML gauge, well, I'm zooming all over the place, into your own aircraft. So you can start using this with radios, other 3D gauges that are already in the game, and you could also do this with your own custom HTML. So this is just how you're going to get your HTML gauge, and you place that in your panel CFG, and then you're going to be placing that texture name into Blender with those specific properties we were talking about, and you can start throwing things on your aircraft. Okay, so what's really nifty here is they all work with full functionality. So whatever's built into that XML script that you're pulling it off of, you can start using it in game. Now let me talk to you about if you did all this and the screen's still black or it's not working. As you can tell here, it turns on and off with battery. And the reason for that is because it's built into the system electronics, but for some odd reason it's not working. Okay, so let's see. If we go back to the dev series, the old reliable, package sources, and you go into your systems, this is talking about all your electronic circuits, okay? And the reason this is working is because we have a certain circuit, I believe it's number 53 here for the GPS. If we deleted all these circuits, even let's go down to just like, you know, we'll go down to the PTOT. That way the engine's still working, but nothing else, okay? And we saved that. And then we rebuilt our package here. As you can see here after from the rebuild, our screen is not working, okay? And the reason our screen is not working is because we don't have an electrical system for it. Even if I'm turning the master battery on and off, our screen will not turn on. And the reason for that is because you need to find the right circuit that you're going to be using for that screen. So in this case, a good example to figure out what exact one you were using is if we pulled that from the icon, just go back into the icon, aircraft icon, go into the icons systems, and you can look at the icon circuits. In this case, it's using its nav and comms, which are its radios. It's using all of its lights, you know, the strobes, the wings, the pitot heat, the audio, the avionics, and there it is, the GPS. So what you need to do is you need to copy this GPS line or whatever you took that HTML gauge from, and whatever it is specifically, you can even put the autopilot in there, whatever you're doing. Then you need to go to your systems and you need to paste that circuit line. In this case, it was circuit 13. Obviously, it doesn't go 51, 52, 13. It goes 51, 52, 53. So we just need to change that to 53, and then we can move these here, and it should work. Okay. And that is how you get circuits working. And in our case, we can actually get rid of a lot of these because we're not going to be using a lot of these for our little template aircraft. So let's go all the way up to lights. And let's keep our avionics line actually. Just so you can kind of see how this is working. And 10, 11, 12, 13, we'll change this to circuit 14 and circuit 15. And in here you can actually mess with all your connection buses, what connection bus it's using, what power it's using. And specifically if you go up to batteries here, as you can see we got multiple buses, and then we got our battery which has our voltage, our capacity, and so you can start messing around with these completely. So let's say you're flying and you notice your GPS screen's dying. It's probably because you don't have it connected to your alternator, and your alternator is what recharges the battery. So in my case, I don't have an alternator in my glider, and so the battery dies after a certain amount of flight, which is pretty realistic. You can't be in a glider for 10 hours. Well, I guess you probably could depending on the battery size, but you can't be in the glider for a long time and let all your avionics work forever. That's not realistic. So you can start messing with this electronic system and really making this work the way you want it to. But you need to have these circuits with that specific HTML gauge plugged in so that it's working in game. So let's go ahead and save that. Once again, rebuild our package, and you should now see our GPS screen will turn on. And there it is. So that's just a simple way. For example, if you did all this HTML scooping and realize it's not working, that's how you go ahead and fix it. Okay? And yeah, so let's go into the next part of this tutorial, which I'm going to be talking about 3D gauges. Okay? And for this one, let's go ahead and just do a simple probably an airspeed gauge, because airspeed is probably one of the biggest things that people want. So let's go ahead, go to one of my other projects here so I can get this airspeed gauge. copy that, and then we'll paste it in here. And as you can see now, we have my pasted gigantic, because you know it's great, and my needle's a little offset here. So let's go ahead and change all this rotation to 0, and my needle here as well to 0. Okay, so we now have our needle and our gauge in game. Cool. And I've already mapped this background on here. And the reason I'm using this gauge for you is because this gauge specifically is not a normal gauge. If you haven't noticed for this tutorial here, it goes from 0 to 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 80, and it's in increments of 10. However, these notches get smaller and smaller and smaller, because this is the way this gauge works, as it goes up. So even though we have 200 to 250 here in this little yellow section, that's 50 keyframes, but the notches are smaller than they were originally up here, because that's only 10, or from 40 to 50 miles or kilometers per hour, that's 10. But if you take 10 here, I mean, that's extremely small. So this thing's variable. This is a variable airspeed, and what we need to do is we need to make sure our animations are set up, and that's why I'm choosing this gauge, so I can let you guys see it exactly how we're going to be doing this thing, okay? So before we go anywhere, let's go ahead and select our meshes here and move them to where they need to go, okay? And obviously we're going to make these smaller. This thing is so massive. But we are getting there. You guys like a gigantic gauge? Could leave it like that. Okay, so we're going to leave it like that. Let's go ahead and at least move this thing up here. And the reason why we're putting this where it needs to go first is because when you start animating that location and rotation, you can't change it after the animation or you're going to screw everything up, okay? So what you need to do is make sure it's all set prior to that and then start animating. So there we go. We got our nice little airspeed gauge here, our 3D airspeed gauge, which is comprised of a gauge and the needle, okay? And then you can even add, like, just like we did the windshield, you can even add like a glass layer over the top if you want some nice glass reflections on the gauge. But yeah, so I'm going to be showing you guys exactly what we're going to be doing for animating here. So let's go ahead, and if you can see here, we start rotating the needle around. The needle's doing some funky things. If you see that, the origin of the needle is not set to where it needs to be. So what we need to do is we need to set that origin to where it needs to be. So the first thing we need to do is isolate that needle. And as you can see here, the origin is just funky. Okay, well, the origin is where it needs to be, but our rotation origin, you know, on the green, the blue, and the red is just not where it needs to be. So what we need to do up here is we need to make sure that we are on local. And that local, as you can see, changes this one, which is all we need to do to get that rotation working right. Okay, so as we're animating, we can make sure we're on local. Now, if you haven't already followed tutorial 2.5, which was made by Brett, and I posted that as part of the official series, it's kind of like a little side video there. He explains how you can actually change these points by, if you go to origins here, you can actually move the rotation of these around and change the way the origin is lined up, which is really awesome. So if you haven't watched episode 2.5 and you're having some rotation issues, please do so. Let's go ahead and turn that back off. So we just need to make sure that when we're animating this needle here, we are in local, so that when we're rotating it, this thing's rotating right and it looks good. Okay. So before we start, let's go ahead and just move this to 0.0. And if the best way to do this, honestly, is to click on your meshes, isolate them, and then get to that good, nice centered view here, where you can really start messing with these changes, okay? Because the view is what matters, okay? So let's go ahead and click on that needle again and go to position 0. And what you're going to want to do on gauges here is you're going to want to obviously choose what kind of gauge it is, what the background is, and you want to get this all set up prior. In this case, I'm going from speed 0 kilometer per hour to 300 max kilometer per hour. So that is my keyframes. I'm going from keyframe 0 to keyframe 300. Okay? So let's go ahead and start animating. So if I do this airspeed needle and I drop the keyframe 0 and I go to 300, and I rotate this thing around, woohoo, all the way to 300, okay? And then I set that animation. You're like, wow, I'm done. Look at that. That was easy. Well, the thing is, if you go, for example, here, and you see 280, does it look like it's on 280? It's not, man. So 250, 60, 70, 80, 280 should be right here. So you're not done, and the reason for this is probably because you don't got linear turned on. So you need to grab those keyframes, you need to go to interpolation mode, you need to go to linear. Now if we go to like keyframe 280, well, would you look at that? We're close, but we're not exactly on it. 250, 60, 70, 80. And so you're like, wow, this sucks. And the reason for this is because this is not a constant gauge. You know, some gauges have the same spacing all the way from minimum to max speeds. This one has this weird spiral going on and the notches are changing. So what we need to do is we need to go to each notch, like this one's 40 for example, and this is after we've already set the linear. And wow, that is not at speed 40 at all. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to rotate that to 40, set it to where it needs to go. Next one is 50. Okay, notch 50, set that to where it needs to go. Then 60, set that to where it needs to go, and etc. So we're probably going to fast forward this part of the video because obviously we're just setting everything up to notches and where they need to go, and so this part will get really boring to watch. Okay, so now we have all of our notches from 0 to 40 and then all the way to 300 set. Okay, so they should be animating correctly. As you can see here, let's go ahead and look at keyframe 20, and 20 is smack dab in the middle between 0 and 40. It actually is working, and the reason for that is because between all of these keyframes we have that linear interpolation set. If we turned that off, you're going to have a real headache, you know, if we turned it to something else. So make sure you have linear set so that when you're messing with these notches, your gauge is moving at where it needs to go from notch to notch to notch to notch. And once again, this is a strange looking, looks like it didn't set 90 for some reason. This is a strange looking gauge because it is very variable. So when you're working with other gauges, it should be fairly simple, especially with like compasses. It's just as simple as, and so a compass, you obviously don't have a minimum and a max speed. A compass, you go from 0 to 360 degrees. So you're going to be doing 0 to 360 degrees and setting north, south, east, and west, and then going down to each individual tick on that whiskey compass and putting the rotation where it needs to be. And a good example of this, let me go ahead and pull up one of my old, or my discus here, so you can kind of see exactly what I've done with the discus. So this is the gauge we just kind of pulled for the tutorial sake, And I've had to do that with altitude. I've had to do that with the compass. As you can see, the compass, and it's because I got a moving dashboard as well. But as you can see here, the compass is rotating, and I've set ticks individually on the compass as well to where it needs to be rotating at. So if you actually go to the compass here, look at its NLA animation, the cylinder whiskey track, you can see exactly how I've done these keyframes from north, south, east to west. And I've done it from 0 to 360 because that's how many degrees are in a compass. Okay, so now that you kind of understand the basics of animating a 3D gauge, let's go ahead and close that and go back to our other one. We need to get the proper XML track. So what we're going to be using for these are custom animation, because custom animation is so much easier than templates when it's coming to 3D gauges. You do not want to use a template. It's just not worth your time. So let's go ahead and go to that Airspeed Indicator, the animation that we just have here for the needle, and let's drop that to a NLA track. This one copied over for some reason. I'm going to delete that. So this is the NLA track we just have, that we just made. And what we're going to do is we're going to name this whatever we want. I'm going to name this Airspeed Indicator. Okay. Now we have our NLA track called Airspeed Indicator. And what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to go into our XML once again that we're going to be using, and we're going to do a custom animation. So we can go ahead and minus a lot of these custom animations from earlier. And we're going to be adding more custom animations here. So let's go ahead and go into the biggest resource we got, which, like I said, if you don't know what resources to use, you haven't downloaded enough content for this game, because a lot of developers have some very good stuff that they've produced, and you can go ahead and use all their XML scripting. So let's go ahead and go into downloads. Let's go look at some other aircraft. Ones I know use custom animation are the Cree and the MB339. They're both some great projects. I'm going to go ahead and use 339 because that honestly has like every gauge known to man in this thing. So let's go ahead and jump into its XML, specifically its interior. And like I said, this whole project was custom animation. Great work by the team. Great work. And let's go ahead and search Airspeed, and they got an Airspeed Indicator. Okay. And what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to copy that entire animation. Let's start with this animation line. And we'll go to after our props, we'll paste that animation line, and we named this, I believe, Airspeed Indicator in Blender. We need to generate our own GUID. If you've never done that, once again, you just bring up Google, GUID generator. Second link here, refresh, copy that GUID, and then go ahead and paste that in here. And the GUID is just that individual indicator so that you're not confusing this animation with other animations on the game engine. And then we can go ahead and, as you can see, the length, they kind of did this a little differently. It doesn't matter how you place these lines. So we could leave it like this, or we can make it uniform with the other ones. I don't really care. In this case, our length was 0 to 300. If you remember, 300 was the max speed that we did our Blender animation to. Was up to the 300 tick. So we make sure we change that to 300. And then let's go ahead and go to the second part of this, which is the Airspeed Indicator, the part info, or the sequence itself. Go ahead and paste that sequence in here. Okay, and now we need to change this name once again to our Airspeed Indicator, and I forgot to change it up here for the type 2 parameter. Where is that? Right here, the type 2 parameter. Make sure you're changing that as well to Airspeed Indicator. We need to change our anime length to 300. and then we're using a code here. So in this case, we're using aircraft code airspeed indicated. And if you don't remember how this works, we're going to go ahead and show you again. This was back in episode, I believe, 2, when I was showing you guys how these things were working. So we're going to local disk C, the Microsoft Flight Simulator SDK. In samples, they have this thing called Simvar Watcher. In Simvar Watcher, you can go to bin x64 release and open the Simvar. Okay, and then this is just a SimConnect product. Okay, so what we're going to want to look for is that airspeed indicated, which is just an aircraft local sim variable. So let's go ahead and find airspeed indicated, and we can set this to whatever we want. In this case, units. We're going to do probably kilometers per hour, because that's what we did in Blender, is we have a kilometers per hour. We can actually change this to knots if we want, you know. But in this case, this specifically is a kilometer per hour gauge. But I will show you the difference just so you guys don't get this confused here. So let's go ahead and add airspeed indicated. Let's add a knots. Okay. And I believe there's a knots. There we go. Add request. And then let's do a kilometer per hour. Or let's see, kilometers per hour. And we'll probably do kilometers per hour. There we go. And if we go ahead and hit connect, because we're in game already, and as we fly here, got so much stuff all over the place. As we fly, you can see our speed is changing on both the knots and the kilometers to how fast we are going in the game, knots and kilometers. So that is the sim variable, and you can see them working over here. And so now that you know that, let's go back into our XML. And you need to choose the appropriate, so we got the airspeed indicated, which once again is that sim variable, airspeed indicated. And this is our units, so comma units. And in this case, we can leave it at knots, and I'm going to change this to kilometers per hour. So all I do is type in kilometers per hour. And then this is your scaling. So in our case, our scaling is 1, because we have our animation from 0 to 300, because our gauge is reading from speed 0 to 300. So for every 1, so from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, all the way up to 300, we're going to want it to put on the animation exactly where that is. So we'll put the scale at 1 instead of 10. Not sure why the MB339 team used 10. Maybe they have that certain gauge in there is reading at increments of 10. But in this case, we're just going to use 1. And then that's it. So let's go ahead and save that animation. In here we have this needle, which should be animating at the airspeed indicator animation name, or your NLA track. Let's go ahead and export this. Now this has a new gauge background here. So what I'm going to do here after I export to make sure that we got that, like I said, this is why you want to do gauges and everything prior to animating it. Make sure you got all your background set, everything's working good. If we go to the textures, we should now see that we have our instruments. Yep, instrument color, that's what I was using to UV map this gauge on there. I was just, as you can see here in this picture, I was UV mapping this gauge specifically around the gauge. And let me show you, I guess, what I did there. So I just went ahead and clicked on my airspeed indicator, went to edit mode, and if you go to UV editing, you can see that I have the whole gauge centered right here. So even if you open, let's say the texture, so you can take a look exactly where it's overlaying on that. It's overlaying exactly on top of that gauge. So I've just UV mapped the front view of this gauge to where it needs to be. So you can do this with any image. So get your images set first so you know exactly where to animate your notches, and then animate your notches. That's kind of where I'm going with this whole thing. Okay, so now that we got that set, let's go back into the game here. Rebuild our package. Okay, let's hit resume. Let's go back into that cockpit view. And we now have our needle, okay? And let's go ahead and get some speed and see how this needle reacts in the game. So as you can see, the needle is working great with speed. And if you want to check that, so let's go ahead and do this. We make sure that our controls, or not controls, sorry, our, I think it's in general actually, our measures per units. I can't remember exactly where I set that thing. Maybe accessibility. Miscellaneous maybe? Yeah, unit of measurements, I have it on metric, okay? So right now, I'm measuring in kilometers per hour. So if I actually go back into the game here, and we go to the exterior view, okay, so what we need to do is we need to go down to camera, and if we look in here, there should be an instruments. And we'll go to toggle, and instruments head-up display. So that's what we're going to be using to see this in exterior. We'll go ahead and click on, apply and save, go back. Now we have our instruments here on the screen. So if we hit play here, let's go ahead and restart just because I completely crashed. You can see the speed, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to get to a speed. And as you can see here, we're going a little bit over 60 knots. For some odd reason, active pause isn't working, so let's just get in the air. So we're at about 70, 60, what's the air? 60 knots. We go to this cockpit and we can see that we are, oh, weird. So that's using knots instead of kilometers per hour, even though I set it to metric. But we can always change that. So if I do this, I can actually show you retroactively here. So let's go ahead and go into XML, change this to knots at the same scale as 1. Save that, rebuild the package. And now we are in knots instead of kilometers, so we're at about 100 knots. If we go to external, we're at about 100 knots. We're now reaching 90. Going to cockpit, we're at 90. So you can see, to make sure that your speeds are correct, you can start using that. For some odd reason, I don't know why that wasn't in kilometers. I swear I set that to metric. But yeah. Now we got working 3D gauges, and we have our working GPS screen as well. And you can always change the size of this GPS screen inside your panel CFG to make it fit better on the screen. But yeah, I hope you guys learned a lot today, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it at the yoke animation, the landing gear, which we learned, 3D gauges, and how to copy over HTML gauges. And then hopefully in the next episode, we will be discussing custom HTML, and some other important things. But this is a good way to start our dashboard for now. I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you for tuning in. Catch you guys next time.